Hotel.
Hotel.
Welcome everyone again to part 3 of what has turned out to be a 4-series talk as relates to authenticating our knowledge in the area of spirituality and religion. And in this particular talk, we said we're going to move into areas of the Bible. And it's very interesting because there's so much that has happened. And in my preparation for presenting the material, I was looking over so much that I had to really do some filtering to not overwhelm you all with all that is available because so much has happened. And I thought I got an idea that I would speak some on the importance of language. And in fact, I do have something I want to give everyone mention something. Okay, thank you. Because what I can do is I'd like to start with what the handout that I've given to everyone. Just start with that and move into language, and then we can move from there into our examination of the Bible and its impact that it has had on us. What I've given you is, you see an image, and that image is 2 images. One is A432 hertz, and the other one is A440. And what's interesting is that in 1953, the International Standards Organization decided to change the tuning from A432 to A440. And in doing that now, many of us don't realize that all of the music is out of tune. Because music, as you can remember, music is one of the disciplines in the curriculum of study for your education. And music has healing properties, but those healing properties cannot be rendered if they're not in tune with the regular cycles and rhythms of the universe. And 432 is a very sacred number. It's connected with a lot of biorhythms that's taking place in the bodies. It's connected with a lot of the rhythms of the cycles of the constellations of the stars, certain events that takes place at certain ages. There's a lot of things that's connected with that. And ancient societies and civilizations were well aware of that. And so they incorporated that number in their music, incorporated in their mathematical proportional way of constructing their buildings and temples and pyramids. And in fact, the pyramid itself has a 1/432 ratio with the earth, dimensions of the earth. And the importance of this is you can see in the image, you see how it looks. The one to your left is 432. See how symmetric it looks. It looks like the sun, rays shooting from the sun. And right next to it you have A440. You see how dense it is. You have some things that's blocked. It's out of tune. It's not in sync. And this is a water sound image. And you know that we are between 70 to 80% water, physical constitution. So sound frequency has an impact on us at many different levels. And if that sound is of dissonance and not of consonance, if it's not mathematically in harmony with the patterns and rhythms of the universe, then it's going to have an impact on us that moves us out of harmony. And so I wanted to give this to everyone to show you how there is law and order in the universe that must be appreciated, observed, and obeyed in order for us to benefit from what all that we can benefit from, all of the energies of the universe in our growth and our development, especially our spiritual growth and development. And interesting enough, I first learned of this through the one and only Kalan Phil Quran. And me and my wife, Camila, we were studying with him. He had some courses at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, and he showed us how all of the music was out of tune. And he has his own made harp that's in tune at 432. And you know, when you listen to Phil Quran's music, it is amazing. Amazing. You feel it not just at an emotional level. Because, you know, we can listen to the music of today and we can get emoted. You know, we feel emotions and all of that. But in terms of his healing properties, in terms of his calmness and tranquility, you don't get that from the music that you listen to. But when you listen to Phil Quran's music, you feel that immediately. It impacts you because there's resonance that's going on. It's in tune with the universe. And by the same token, if ancient societies, ancient languages are in tune with the universe, then these modern languages, many of the modern languages that we're speaking that have moved away and strayed from ancient languages is not in tune. And what I would like to do very quickly talk a little bit about language. And linguistics is the study, scientific study of languages. And when you have a fundamental breakdown of language studies, it is generally examined in three main areas. And you have sound, which deals with pronunciation. And I'm going to try to go through this real quickly, but it's very important. You have structure, where we get grammar. And then you have meaning. And the word that is used is semantics. And then these branch off into other subdivisions in the study of language. In sound, we have phonology and phonetics. Now, with phonology deals with the function of sound within a language as it relates to the encoding of meaning. And now, that's very important because sound encodes meaning just like light encodes meaning. Right now, if I was to turn off the light in this room, we wouldn't be able to see anything. Because the way seeing operates is that the light reflects off the objects and enter into the eyes, and then the eyes send through the optic nerve up to the brain for there to be a decoding of the information that has been encoded through the light. And then it depends on the light source. If you use a laser light beam where two laser beams cross each other and create an inference pattern, then another light, that laser light shine in that, will reveal a holographic image. The light is capable of encoding information in a three-dimensional way. Well, sound encodes information the same way. And it depends on the language that you speak. In ancient languages, because they were very knowledgeable, it's coming from the consciousness of a mind that was in tune with the universal laws of nature. The language that they spoke encoded information from the whole entirety of the universe. And encoded information in ways that the way that the sound was pronounced, which is what phonetics addresses. Phonetics addresses the pronunciation, the transmission, perception, and reception of speech. And the pronunciation was very important. And the pronunciation itself have pitches, inflections, tones that helps you to be in concert with elemental forces of nature. just as the language is spoken. And then in the structure, you have morphology. This is all what fundamental way that language studies is broken down into. Morphology, and then you have syntax. Morphology deals with word formation, the way that words themselves are constructed. The smallest units of the words are considered like morphemes. And like you have, I won't go into any detailed explanation of, but you have you have ear, you have affixes, suffixes, prefixes, all of that word construction. And morphology deals with that word form. And also, I meant to mention that what I'm doing in the study of linguistics, Sanskrit language. This is what I want us to really look at specifically as it relates to how this language satisfies all the criteria that is required for a language to have itself in harmony with natural forces of the universe, the Sanskrit language. But morphology deals with word formation, and syntax deals with word combination. I didn't want to really write all of what I'm saying because it would be so condensed. But syntax deals with word combination. So the formation of sentences is what, and word order. Whereas morphology deals with word formation, syntax deals with word order. And interesting enough, Sanskrit is a language that places more emphasis on formation rather than word order. Because again, it is sound that is responsible for the formation of things, just as we see these images that's being produced by specific pitches. And so the formation is very important. Pronunciation, enunciation, all of that is very, very important in the speaking of a language so that you can get the full effects and you coming into resonance with energies that would help you not only to heal and balance, but also to ascend to higher states of consciousness. And this is why you will never find any kind of spiritual mantras in any language other than ancient languages, ancient African and ancient Indian languages. You won't have any European mantras being implemented because the language is inadequate to supply what is needed for you to ascend to higher states of consciousness. So then meaning branches out into three semantics. You have formal semantics, and formal semantics addresses meaning in regard to sense, reference, and implication. And what's interesting about that is I can even use the word meaning. Word sense is very important because meaning is largely context dependent. Things do not pretty much take on meaning independent of being related to other things. That's how they take on their meaning, through context. And we're always looking for context. Even as we speak to people, we ask them, do you understand what I mean? We want to know if they receive us in the right context. And we're always reading the context of a situation to assess its meaning. And so like if I was to say, do you know what I mean? That meaning, the meaning that's being used in that phrase, as I'm asking you, have you understood me? Are you getting the point of what I'm saying? If I say, what is the meaning of life? Now, what is its purpose? What is its goal? If I say, you know what, I really didn't mean to do that. Now meaning is being used to show that I didn't do it intentionally. And then if I say, well, it didn't really mean anything to me. Now meaning is indicating worth, value, significance, is worthless. And things that take on the highest meaning and the highest value is what we worship. So word sense, you can see where it's very important depending on how you use meaning and all the other words around it, what is elucidated from that. And the context is what helps you to get a greater understanding of what is being conveyed through the usage of the words. Now, depending on the language that you use, that determines how deep you can go in terms of expressing what is available within reality that has been awakened to your consciousness, which is using the language as a vehicle for expression. It depends on the language how deep you can go in conveying meaning. And if you're using a language such as Sanskrit, which is in concert in harmony with the universal laws of nature, then now that language is capable of reflecting truth and reality in ways that as you speak the language and even as you read the language, you come into resonance with those higher energies that would have you awaken to a higher state of awareness. And so that's just the formal semantics. Then you have conceptual. I won't go into all of the explanation of all of these because we'll be here for a while. You have conceptual semantics, and for some reason now I'm not remembering what that last one is. It's the third one, and I guess I'm trying to move a little through this language aspect. I promise I wouldn't stay on it for too long, but it's one of my fields of study that I've been studying for a long time. I have many books on language, and it's so important. But there's a criteria that must be met in order for language to qualify as an adequate means for the expression of truth and reality. And Sanskrit language has all of the qualifications. It satisfies all the criteria. I'll just write it down in case the third one come to me. It must have stability. With unity in diversity. And reflectivity. Reflectivity in regards to consciousness itself. Because it's our ability to be self-reflective in this consciousness, unique consciousness that we have, that we're able to know things across the entire spectrum of the universe. We have a very unique consciousness. And language that is authentic has the power to reflect consciousness at its most subtle levels and then afford an expression in the way that that consciousness uses language as a vehicle to convey meaning. Those stability, unity, diversity, and reflectivity of consciousness is the criteria that must be satisfied in order for that language to convey truth, reflect reality. Now, how does all of this connect with the Bible? Most people believe that it is a word of truth. It is the word of God. However, the language that it is in, and I'm specifically speaking to the King James Version of the Bible, because we said that we would have our talk specifically revolving around that. Now we're talking about a translation. A translation that is a language that is really inadequate for housing the perceptions, that really does not have stability, it does not reflect unity and diversity, and it does not reflect the subtle levels of consciousness. The language is changing. English language is really technically is not even a language. It's not a language, it's communication. It's more like a communication device that is being used by people who do not speak a native tongue. That's what they call it, a lingua franca. It's not a language. So technically, it's not, we're not speaking the language. And the reason why I started off with this image in this 432 to show how just as ancient man constructed his pyramids, his temples, he created music, mathematics, spirituality, philosophy, everything that reflected the cosmos. All of that came out of a conscious mindset. So why would that consciousness use as a vehicle for its expression a language that does not reflect all the things that's being produced by it? It did. Ancient language has within it everything that is needed for our spiritual awakening, just in the speaking of it and in the reading of it, because right now I'd like to read something as it relates to Sanskrit language. In the Sanskrit language, the letters of the alphabet are grouped into families according to the exact position in the vocal apparatus where they are sounded, and their particular method of articulation. So this means that the written form of the language reflects the oral form exactly. So it's not arbitrarily constructed, whereas you have in the English language, we have A, we have B and C, we got the consonants and the vowels, and even in their writing, when we're writing it, we have uppercase and lowercase. Now here you got two different forms, which is the same sound. You don't find that in Sanskrit language. And the sound that is A in the Sanskrit language is always pronounced the exact same way. It never varies. So it has a stability. And this is why when you're learning spiritual teachings, in the Sanskrit language, which happens to be an African language, African Dravidian language, when you're learning that, you're coming into resonance with forces that enable you to have a quickening in your spiritual awakening. We're far removed from having a justly understanding of this because we have been taken away from our culture that will allow us to appreciate this. And our mindset is heavily conditioned by the language that we speak and the way and the language. Oh, I know now. It's just come to me. I knew it would come to me. The last one is lexical. Lexical semantics. And this basically deals with the vocabulary. I know my writing is a little bit squabbly. I apologize for that. But this deals with the vocabulary. If anyone wants me to spell that out, need me to spell it out for those who are writing it down?
L-E-X-I-C-A-L.
Yeah, L-E-X-I-C-A-L, lexical. You may have heard of lexicology or lexicon, but it basically deals with word vocabulary. Every language has a vocabulary that comes with it. And you know, in the Eskimo language, you have many different words for snow because they capture every subtle way that the snow is expressing meaning to their mind, what it's indicating. They have a word that addresses that. And in the Sanskrit language, they have a lot of words that expresses and relate to consciousness. Whereas within this English language, when we think about consciousness, we have words like awake, sleep, dream, unconscious, subconscious, daydream, some things that contradict themselves. I remember one time when we were having a set song and we was talking about righteous indignation. And Guru Nanak just cringed at that because of indignant, and then you have righteous. But the way it is expressed, righteous indignation, you know, some righteous way of defending injustices that's, you know, the words themselves do not do justice for explaining what is being conveyed. But we use words like this.
Oxymorons like ill elf.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. How do you?
We trap. Language really encapsulates you and traps you. And the language that you speak, what I was about to say as it relates to lexical semantics, the language that you speak predisposes you to see the world a certain way. Or your worldview is connected to the language that you speak. Because you remember when we talked about the 3 dimensions of culture, within the core structure of culture, that's where you have the worldview and the ethos and the ideology. And the worldview then now expresses itself in the language. In the gross dimension of culture, where you have the religion, you have the customs, the rituals, the dress, and language. That's a gross dimension of culture. But then all of that is connected, whereas once you learn that language and you speak it, you are encapsulated within the conceptual, cognitive structure of the meaning that's embedded in the vocabulary of words that you use to express how you see the world and how you see yourself in all the ways that you interact and engage within your environment. Your language predisposes you to see it a certain way. So that's why it's good to learn another language, because your attention is not tracked to whereas it cannot move outside the parameters of the language that you speak. But if you don't know another language and you don't expose yourself to any other language, then you are trapped to see things in accordance with that language. Once you start learning another language, especially languages that satisfy the criteria for expressing reality and truth, because our purpose in life is to awaken to the highest truth, the spiritual divine being that we are, to become enlightened. When you learn a language that has the capacity to move you through levels of higher stages of growth and development, then that opens you up. It disciplines you. It heals you. Matter of fact, it starts awakening within you residuals of that language that is still, all of the African languages that our ancestors spoke is still encoded within us. It's still within the DNA of our psychology. It's just been repressed. So it's not like it's been beaten out of us and that we're disconnected to our culture and our language and all of that. It's just that we cannot have access to it because it's been repressed, and then in its place we've been given this language. Once you start learning other languages that are of the African family, Eastern languages, then there will be an awakening of this energy in you and a resonance that would take place that would facilitate your spiritual development. And this is why many people who are engaging in spiritual development, they will expose themselves to some form of African or Indian language, especially as they are studying mantric powers, the words of power that I use when you repeat and recite a mantra, and that kind of spurts up interest in you to learn more about the culture and the language that you are studying. Those who are really serious about their spiritual development, you will see changes in your life. But so all of this relates. I just wanted to start out by making it very clear. First of all, this is just an introductory for everyone to do further research and study, because I can't really cover everything within this time frame that we have here. But I just wanted to at least generate some interest in those here participating to really study language Because one of the ways they keep us from recovering and reclaiming what's ours is to have us be disinterested in social studies and language arts. Because if you don't learn anything about history through social studies, and you don't learn language that you learn that created that history, then all that you are learning and all that you do know is what we know and learn now, which is doing what for us in terms of our empowerment at any level, economic, political, spiritual, even just regular physical, because many of the things that we do is not benefiting us in any kind of way. And one more thing I want to say before I move away from this is that pronunciation is so important. And this word right here, we use this word, Egypt, to refer to a country in Africa. But the origin of that word come to us from a failed attempt of the Greeks to pronounce a temple in Menepher, which we call Memphis, which was called Hikapata. They could not pronounce it, so they were saying Aguptus. And then Aguptus, when Latinized, became Egypt. And now we're saying Egypt. But now think about that. We're using the wrong pronunciation to refer, and we're using it to refer to a whole land area when originally it was referring to a temple in a place in Menepher. But now we're saying Egypt is a wrong pronunciation. That ignorance was passed on to us now, and we're just using it, thinking, oh, well, long as we know what we're talking about, it doesn't work that way. It can work only at a level of making you familiar with the geographical area, but when you correctly pronunciate something, it has power. That's where we get hakus from, words of power.
Open sesame.
It's very important. And it's interesting because the Arabic language is very similar to the Sanskrit language in its script form, how it looks, how it sounds. And if you listen to people recite the Arabic prayers, how they are so emphatic with the pronunciation and the nasal, every part of it, they pay careful attention to it. Because there's reason behind that. They're not just loosely enunciating it, just, well, you know what the word is. They're not doing that. And you have to be trained to say it in such a way, because it has effects that's actually doing something to your psychology as you speak it. Well, we have become disconnected from that. So I just thought I wanted to really mention that, because this is one of many different words that we use that has come into our usage in the language that we speak as a result of an error in pronunciation. So if that's an error in pronunciation, the original consciousness that created the word to express what this word is intended to relate to, now there's a contamination in understanding what that consciousness was trying to get us to understand. That idea that it represented is now diluted because we're not pronunciating it right. So we can't fully connect with it and get the full potency of what it has to offer if we're not using all of these dynamics within the language in a way that they're supposed to be used so that they can reflect the truth and reality. And it's very important, because if we think that when we open up the Bible, that we're reading scripture text that is the word of God, and it's in a language that's inadequate to house the perceptions that are expressing the revelations that took place in the minds of the people who had this knowledge, if we think that we're reading the Word of God, we're not. And we can, in some small degree, see how through what I outlined as relate to language. And one last thing in closing, in this area, the Sanskrit script is called the Devanagari script. That's one of the ways, that's one of the terms, that is the term that describes what the script is. And this translates in almost exactness to Maduna term, divine speech, because Devi is divine, and this is regard to script, temple city script. So it's like the divine writing. Again, remember, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop is the one who revealed to us the cultural unity of all of Africa, and how much of what is the Indian civilization who are benefiting from the Sanskrit language, the Africans migrated there, and they set up in Mohenjo-Daro the spiritual teachings and the spiritual civilization, and they were utilizing the Sanskrit language. So they carried with them this spiritual knowledge coming from the high spiritual civilizations of Kemet. And